instance, is say that the trolls say that. I don't particularly believe it, but that's one of the things she had to
hold
face.
On.
Yeah, no.
You don't believe it.
No, that's why I explained. That's why I put it.
But if you quote or you use trolls, Tom, which are universally considered to be the lowest of the low,
Yes.
people that spend their time on the internet literally just trying to create incendiary statements to wind people up. But if you quote them in your book, and you're saying now you don't believe it, which you may well be in there, then you're giving them the airtime of that.
Well, their lives.
But for the people that you're saying are the Queen's close friends, and the people you're saying that are staff that you've spoken to, for the people that you're saying have worked with them, that's one thing that you say. But these are faceless voices on the internet that could well
them trolls.
But could well be bots. They don't even know they're real. Tom.
Well, I know they're real because I spoke to I traced a couple of them. But I mean that's not the point. Surely the point is that I named the source as a troll. I don't pretend that they're anything other than.
But that just undermines their credibility, though. You see that? I mean, you're like trolls. For all of us who work in the public eye, and I'm sure you have experienced this as well personally, the people on the internet that you look at that just want to write these incendiary things about you, they can be faceless voices that just sit and shout in their own bedrooms.
Yeah. Well, it is a minor point, but you're insistent on going through it. But the point is, I quote the source.
Sam, because you can't just undermine it. They're in your book.
They are.
And we're trying to talk about the credibility of your sources.
Yes.
And some of the sources that you quote, you actually call trolls.
Well, exactly. That's the point. I quote them. I don't deny that. But the whole point about Meghan and Harry's life is they generate hatred, they generate anger, they generate controversy.
They don't just do that. That's your opinion. They don't just do that. They do generate a lot of interest in charitable causes. They're doing extraordinary things for what Harry's done for Invictus particularly, and we'll come on to that in just a moment. You can't deny that has been a hugely powerful movement for all of the servicemen and women that have been involved in Invictus, and the difference that has made to their lives.
He just said it. Out loud, calmly, like it was completely normal and reasonable. Like admitting you don't believe your own sources is just standard operating procedure. So here we are. Let's talk about what just happened, because this clip is not just messy in an entertaining way, it's revealing in a way that honestly explains so much about how certain narratives get built and sustained around Harry and Meghan. All right. We need to start with the core moment, the nuclear moment, the one that made everyone in that studio pause like, wait, did he really just say that out loud on television? Tom Bower openly, explicitly admits that he included claims from trolls in his book. Not anonymous sources with insider knowledge, not confidential sources who needed protection, not people close to the situation who couldn't go on record. Trolls. Internet trolls. Not only that, and this is where it gets truly spectacular, he admits that he doesn't even believe some of those claims himself. Let that sink in properly. Let it really marinate in your brain. Because that's not a slip of the tongue. That's not something taken out of context or edited deceptively. That is a direct, unambiguous admission that information he himself considers unreliable, questionable, potentially false, still made it into a published book that people paid money for. And somehow, we're supposed to treat that book as serious journalism, as credible biography? No, absolutely not. We're not doing that today. Because what you just saw Ben and Kat do in that interview is something very simple, very basic, and apparently very rare in royal media coverage. They applied logic. They asked obvious questions. They didn't let contradictions slide by unexamined. That's it. That's all they did. They didn't shout him down. They didn't attack him personally. They didn't come with some dramatic agenda or axe to grind. They just asked the most obvious question imaginable. If you don't believe these sources yourself, why are they in your book? And that question, that simple, logical question, it broke the whole thing wide open. Because you could see it happen in real time. The moment the conversation shifted from comfortable, let me promote my work territory to uncomfortable, wait, this doesn't actually make sense territory. The defensive body language, the attempts to minimize, the pivoting, all of it visible, all of it telling. Now, Tom tries to defend himself by saying, well, I identified them as trolls in the book. Like that's supposed to fix the fundamental problem. Like labeling garbage doesn't make it not garbage. But let's really think about that defense for a second, because it's absurd. If you knowingly, deliberately include unreliable, potentially anonymous, possibly fabricated claims in a book that presents itself as serious biography, labeling them as unreliable doesn't suddenly make them credible or appropriate to include. It just means you knowingly included unreliable information. That's it. That's what that means. There's no magical journalism loophole where you can say, I don't believe this, but I'm putting it in anyway, and somehow walk away with your credibility intact. That's not transparency. That's not journalistic rigor. That's a disclaimer, a legal cover-your-ass disclaimer. And a disclaimer does not cancel out fundamentally bad sourcing practices. If anything, it makes it worse, because now it's not even a mistake or oversight. It's a choice, a deliberate, conscious decision to include voices that you acknowledge are not trustworthy. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable, where Ben really doesn't let it go. He pushes, calmly but firmly, and lays out the obvious problem. Trolls, by widely understood definition, are people who post inflammatory, misleading, provocative content primarily for attention, disruption, or malicious purposes. They can be completely anonymous with no verifiable identity. They can be bots or coordinated accounts rather than real individuals. They can be operating in bad faith with deliberate misinformation goals. They are, by definition and common understanding, fundamentally unreliable sources. And yet, they're being quoted in a book that presents itself as a serious, credible account of real people's lives. Do you see the massive problem yet? Because the presenters definitely did. And honestly, their reaction, that mix of confusion and disbelief, felt like it captured what the entire audience was thinking. Are we seriously having this conversation right now? Is this really happening? And then Tom does something absolutely revealing, something that tells you everything about his priorities and approach. He tries to minimize the entire issue. He calls it a minor point. A minor point. The credibility of your sources, the foundation of your entire book, is a minor point? That right there might be the single most revealing moment of the entire interview, because it tells you everything about what matters and what doesn't in his methodology. If source credibility is a minor point, then what exactly is the major point? The narrative you want to tell? The headline you want to generate? The controversy you want to create? The sales you want to achieve? Because it starts to feel less like journalism or biography and more like storytelling with selectively chosen ingredients designed to support a predetermined conclusion. And look, that's not how credible work gets done. That's not how reliable information gets disseminated. And look, let's be fair and balanced for a second here. There's nothing inherently wrong with analyzing public figures. There's nothing wrong with criticism or investigative work. There's nothing wrong with writing books, doing research, asking difficult questions. That's all part of a healthy media landscape and democratic discourse. But there is a line, a clear, bright line that separates credible work from whatever this is. And that line is source credibility, verification, standards. Once you start pulling in sources that you yourself don't trust, that you yourself don't believe, you're not just approaching that line. You're not crossing it quietly or accidentally. You're stepping over it with full confidence and awareness and expecting nobody to notice or care. Except this time, people noticed, live, on air, in real time, with cameras rolling. And the internet never forgets. And then, as if things weren't already spiraling beautifully out of control, we get to the next part. The pivot, the deflection attempt. Because once the conversation about troll sources starts getting genuinely uncomfortable and indefensible, Tom shifts to a broader, vaguer claim. He says that Harry and Meghan generate hatred, anger, division, controversy. Now, notice what happens immediately, and this is important. Kat steps in sharply and says, That's your opinion. That's your interpretation, not objective fact. And that moment matters enormously because it separates two very important, very different things that often get deliberately conflated: facts and interpretation, objective reality and subjective opinion. You can have whatever opinions you want about public figures. Everyone does. That's normal and fine. But presenting opinions, especially negative ones, as if they are objective, established reality, that's where things get messy and manipulative. And Kat doesn't stop there. She doesn't let the pivot succeed. She brings up something very real, very tangible, very difficult to argue against even if you dislike Harry and Meghan: the measurable, documented impact of Invictus games. Now, suddenly, the conversation isn't about vague claims or emotional reactions or internet troll opinions. It's about something concrete, verifiable, real. A global initiative that has genuinely, demonstrably changed lives for wounded veterans from multiple countries. And you can feel the shift in energy again, the discomfort, because it disrupts the simple narrative. It challenges the idea that everything surrounding Harry and Meghan is just controversy or drama or attention-seeking. It introduces nuance, complexity, evidence of positive impact. And nuance is not always welcome in certain types of conversations, because nuance complicates things. It forces people to acknowledge that reality is not one-dimensional, not black and white, that you can have legitimate criticism and positive impact existing simultaneously in the same person or situation. Now, let's zoom out a bit from this specific interview, because this isn't just about one awkward TV appearance where someone got caught out. This is about a pattern, a method, a system. When you include unreliable sources, even with disclaimers, even with labels, even with identification, you're doing something very specific and deliberate. You're amplifying them. You're elevating them. You're taking something that exists in the shadows and cesspools of the internet and giving it a platform. You're bringing it into mainstream discourse. And once it's in print, once it's in a published book, once it's being discussed on television and quoted in articles, it gains weight. It gains legitimacy. It gains authority, even if it doesn't deserve any of those things. And that's the real issue here that goes beyond just sloppy methodology. Because most people, the vast majority of readers, aren't going to go line by line through a 400-page book carefully analyzing source credibility for each claim. They're not media literacy experts. They're not trained researchers. They're going to assume that what they're reading has been properly vetted, that it meets certain professional standards, that it's based on something solid and verifiable. That's a reasonable assumption when you pick up a published book from a known author. So when you start mixing in questionable material, troll claims, unverified speculation, alongside legitimate reporting, you're blurring that line deliberately. You're creating a situation where readers can't easily distinguish between what's reliable and what isn't, what's verified and what's internet gossip. And that's not just sloppy journalism. That's not just poor methodology. That's irresponsible. That's potentially harmful. Now, let's talk about the delicious irony for a second, because it's almost too perfect. We constantly hear from these same media figures, from these same commentators, about the dangers of misinformation, about the importance of reliable sources, about the necessity of fact-checking, about media literacy, about not believing everything you read online. It's a constant drumbeat, and rightfully so. These are real concerns. And here we have a moment where someone openly admits, on camera, to using questionable troll sources in a published book. And the defense is basically, well, I told you they were questionable, so it's fine. That's not reassuring. That's not acceptable. That's deeply concerning, because it suggests a level of comfort with the idea that as long as something is disclosed somewhere, buried in text, It's acceptable to include it. But disclosure doesn't equal justification. Labeling doesn't equal verification. And it definitely doesn't equal credibility. Now, here's the part that really stands out about this interview and makes it so effective. Nobody had to take him down. Nobody had to aggressively attack or create a viral gotcha moment. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match, no theatrical showdown. It was just a conversation, questions and answers. And that's what makes it so powerful and so damning. Because sometimes the most effective way to expose a problem, to reveal contradictions, is to simply let someone explain themselves, fully, without interruption, without interference. Just let them talk. Give them the rope and the platform. And eventually, if the foundation is weak, the contradictions start to show. The gaps become visible. The logic starts to fall apart under its own weight. And that's exactly what happened here. This wasn't an attack or a takedown. It was an unraveling. And honestly, it was kind of fascinating to watch in real time because you could see the shift happening, the progression. From confidence and comfort at the start, I'm here to promote my book, to defensiveness when questions got pointed, well, I identified them, to dismissal and minimization, this is a minor point, and finally to that visible desire to move past the issue as quickly as possible and get back to safer ground. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. The point had been made, the question had been asked and answered. And the answer was already out there, recorded, clipped, spreading. You can't unsay something once it's said on camera. Now, where does this leave us? What does this mean beyond this one interview? Well, it raises a much bigger question about standards, about what we expect and demand from people who present themselves as credible voices, as authorities, as serious journalists or biographers. Because if this is acceptable, if this is considered normal and fine, then what exactly are we measuring credibility against? What's the baseline? What are the standards? Because it can't just be, it's in a book. That's not enough. That's not a standard. It has to be more than that. It has to be about the quality of the information, the reliability of the sources, the integrity of the verification process, the ethics of the methodology. Otherwise, what are we even doing? What's the point of distinguishing between credible work and gossip? And maybe that's why this moment hit so hard, why it resonated, why it's being shared and discussed, because it pulled back the curtain just a little, just enough, and gave people a genuine glimpse of how some of these narratives about Harry and Meghan are actually constructed behind the scenes. Not through airtight evidence and rigorous verification, not through multiple confirmed sources and careful fact-checking, but through a mix of sources, some solid, some questionable, some outright unreliable, all packaged together and presented as a cohesive, credible story. And once you see that, once you understand that methodology, it changes how you read everything else. So yeah, that interview, it wasn't just uncomfortable or awkward, it was important, it was revealing, it was necessary. Because it sparked a conversation that needs to happen far more often in royal media coverage, about standards, about accountability, about source verification, about what we accept as credible, and what we should probably start questioning a lot more carefully. And if nothing else, it proved one thing very clearly. Sometimes you don't need a scandal or a leak or a dramatic expose. Sometimes all you need is a microphone, a camera, and a few honest, logical questions, and someone willing to answer them on the record. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated seeing Tom Bower's credibility crumble in real time, smash that like button and subscribe for more media accountability. Until next time, stay critical, demand sources, and never trust trolls. I'll see you in the next one.